Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're stepping into Dr. Kem's cinematic lecture on the taxonomy of scientific data. We aren't just looking at numbers here. We are quite literally decoding the very fabric of the universe. Let's dive in and learn exactly how we categorize the information that powers our modern world.
To really get why this matters, let's look at the sheer scale of the situation. Humanity generates a staggering 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every single day. That is an almost unfathomable amount of information. To put that into perspective for you, it's like mapping the complete DNA sequence of every living organism on Earth every single day. This is the raw fuel for everything from tracking global climate models to engineering next-generation biotechnology.
But before we can make sense of that overwhelming volume, we have to start with the foundational mindset of the scientific method, which is all about asking the right questions. Observation and curiosity are the absolute bedrock of all science. Data without curiosity? Well, that's just noise. It's the human element that seeks out meaning and utility from all this chaos.
To bring order to this vast cosmos of information, we're going to follow this structured roadmap. We'll cover 1. The data explosion. 2. Sourcing, primary versus secondary. 3. Qualitative, the descriptive data. 4. Quantitative, the numbers game. 5. Levels of measurement. And finally, 6. Why data types matter.
Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, the data explosion.
Data research in the sciences generally falls into two distinct paradigms. The first is hypothesis-driven. Think of running a targeted clinical trial to test a very specific drug. And then you have data-driven research. This is where you feed millions of genomic sequences into an algorithm just to see what hidden evolutionary patterns naturally emerge. Both of these paradigms require a rock-solid understanding of exactly what kind of information you're holding in your hands.
Moving on to Section 2, sourcing, primary versus secondary.
So primary data is the real-time measurement you take while, say, monitoring a chemical reaction in your own lab. It's incredibly tailored to your specific parameters, but it can be highly expensive and time-consuming to gather. Secondary data, on the flip side, involves utilizing a massive, pre-existing global database that other researchers have already compiled. It's highly economical and fast to get, but you have to do the rigorous work of ensuring it actually fits your specific analytical context.
Next up is Section 3, qualitative, the descriptive data.
This is a crucial distinction. Qualitative data gives us the descriptive what, like observing that a chemical solution has just turned a cloudy blue. Quantitative data, however, gives us the hard numerical facts, like the exact pH level of that same solution. Qualitative data categorizes information into non-numerical formats, providing that vital descriptive context that numbers alone just cannot capture.
Drilling down into qualitative data, we first find nominal data. Derived from the Latin word for name, this relies on pure classification. It allows us to differentiate between subjects based solely on their category, with absolutely no mathematical weight attached to the label. Think of blood types like A, B, and O, or different chemical functional groups. You can't perform math on these categories, and there's no natural rank to them. Since a machine learning algorithm can't do math on the word bacteria, it uses a clever technique called one-hot encoding to create a simple true or false checklist. This makes the labels mathematically digestible without implying one species is physically higher or lower than another.
But what if our qualitative categories do have a natural rank? Well, that gives us ordinal data. This type of data lives in a fascinating in-between state. It's qualitative, for sure, but it carries an inherent sequence.
Great examples in science include the Mohs scale of mineral hardness, or a patient's cancer staging from stage 1 to stage 4. While stage 3 is definitively more advanced than stage 2, you cannot assume the mathematical, biological distance between those stages is perfectly equal. This means we can find the median end of data, but calculating a true mean average is completely impossible.
Let's flip over to Section 4, quantitative, the numbers game. Under quantitative, we have discrete data. This represents distinct, separate units that you can count, one by one. There is absolutely no middle ground here. It deals exclusively in whole integers.
In science, you can't have half a cell division, right? Or 5.7 electrons in an orbit. Discrete data is visualized with distinct gaps in bar graphs because values between those whole integers simply violate the laws of physics in that specific context.
In contrast, if your data can be broken down into infinitesimally smaller fractions, you are dealing with continuous data. This is where we transition from simply counting things to precisely measuring things. Whether it's the exact mass of a synthesized compound down to the microgram, or the precise wavelength of light emitted by a distant star, continuous data flows seamlessly. Because these values move along in unbroken sequence, we visualize them without gaps, usually using histograms or line charts. Essentially, there is always a finer measurement you could potentially take if you just had a precise enough instrument. Let's look at the rules governing all of this in Section 5, Levels of Measurement.
This table establishes the famous Stevens levels of measurement, which is a massive game changer. Notice how interval data, like the Celsius scale, allows for addition but has no true zero, meaning 0 degrees does not equal the complete absence of heat. Ratio data, on the other hand, like the Kelvin scale, does have an absolute true zero where all molecular movement literally stops. Because of that true zero, you can mathematically prove that 200 Kelvin has exactly twice the thermal energy of 100 Kelvin, making it the most precise and flexible data type we have.
Finally, let's tie this all together in Section 6, Why Data Types Matter.
Choosing the correct data type literally dictates your entire statistical process. Imagine if a researcher mistakes ordinal categorical data for interval data in a massive clinical trial and inappropriately runs a standard mean average on it. Their entire conclusion about a new drug's efficacy could be wildly, dangerously inaccurate. The stakes are incredibly high.
Consider this. 80% of enterprise and real-world scientific data is floating around as unstructured raw material. We're talking thousands of complex microscopy images or raw environmental audio recordings. Categorizing this chaos into usable, nominal, or continuous variables is basically the ultimate art of applied machine learning in bioinformatics. These algorithms can only predict the future if you accurately translate the present for them.
Because at the end of the day, data isn't just a collection of numbers on a spreadsheet. It's a reflection of the messy, random reality of our universe. So the ultimate question you have to ask yourself is this: are we simply measuring the universe, or is the universe just one massive data set waiting for us to find the right algorithms?